Victoria Festival of Authors and the Metro Theatre is located on the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, known as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. We acknowledge the ancestors, hereditary leaders, and matriarchs, as well as the creators from these lands, and give thanks for the privilege of living and working here. We are committed to serving as learners and as listeners on this journey to reconciliation. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kagan McFadden, and I'm the president of the board of directors for the Victoria Festival of Authors. Welcome to A Corrective Lens, featuring poets Nancy Holmes, Cecily Nicholson, Jan Zwicky, and photographer Robert Moody. I'd like to also thank our sponsors, the BC Arts Council, the Canada Council for the Arts, the CRD, the City of Victoria, Access Copyright, the Victoria Foundation, and Munro's Books. Thanks also to the League of Canadian Poets, who has sponsored Nancy's appearance at our festival this year. A special thanks to Planet Earth Poetry for curating this event, and also to Mo's Home Collection and Poppy's Floral Art for providing the lovely set. Doesn't it feel homey? There will be no intermission this evening, but if you need to visit the restroom, you will find it up the stairs just at the start of the lobby. Closed captioning is provided, and you can access it through your phone or tablet. Please ask a volunteer for the Wi-Fi password and URL. If any volunteers can raise their hand, or if anyone needs help, maybe you raise your hand. There'll be lots of hands. But mentioning phones, please make sure you have yours to silent so that none of the readings are interrupted. This panel is moderated by Susan Alexander. Susan Alexander is a poet and former journalist with a deep concern for the natural world. Her poems have won multiple awards, shown up in the woods around Whistler, and ridden the bus as part of Poetry in Transit. Nothing You Can Carry is at the table is the title of her latest collection, and at the end of the event, Susan's book, as well as all the other books, will be available for purchase and signing. So, welcome, poets and listeners.
Thank you so much. How's this? Can you guys hear me? Okay, hi, I'm Susan, and thank you so much, Keegan, and to the Victoria Festival of Authors and Planet Earth Poetry for this event. And tonight, here we are, in person and live streaming, and it's so neat to be in a venue with flesh and blood. So welcome. We welcome everyone watching wherever you are. And you are in for a real treat tonight. 3 new books. The ink is literally still drying on a couple of them. And 3 master poets, Nancy Holmes, Cecily Nicholson, and Jan Zwicky. And Jan and Robert Moody have collaborated in their book. The way we're going to do this is I'm going to introduce each writer separately, not because I want to interrupt, but just to give some space between the readings, because I find poetry is such a distilled, intense experience. I just want to give you a little bit of space between one reader and another. Because that's one thing I really do believe in. Poetry needs space. It also needs silence, something I'm not terribly good at. But, anyway, so after this, after the readings, we're going to move directly into a conversation. And if I'm not too greedy, I will leave you some space for questions with the writers. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. All right, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Nancy Holmes to start. And I'm going to introduce herself and her book. Arborophobia, I practiced that and I still screwed it up. Arborophobia is Nancy Holmes' 6th collection of poetry. She's the editor of Open Wide, A Wilderness, Canadian Nature Poems, and she's a poetry editor on The Trumpeter. She creates, supports, and curates eco-themed, community-based art projects. Nancy is Associate Professor in Creative Writing at UBC Okanagan in Kelowna. Arborophobia is a poetic, spiritual reckoning. Its elegies, litanies, indictments concern wonder, guilt, and grief. Taking a hard look at what we have done to this planet and to those we love, arborophobia is a companion for all who grapple with the problem of hope in times of crisis. Nancy.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Is this on? Can people hear me? It's
Maybe
okay?
closer.
Closer? How's that? Better? Okay, great. And don't worry about the name. Someone once said to me, my old professor, Chris Wiseman, said, Nancy, your titles of your books are always completely unpronounceable for people. I just want to thank the organizers of the Victoria Poetry Festival for inviting me, Laura Trunke and the League of Canadian Poets, and really thank you, Dallas Jocelyn, for her lovely interview with me. It was a really nice part of this festival to have that sort of interview before we got here. I just want to also just acknowledge two special people in the audience. My dear niece, Marie, who is doing a writing degree at UVic. Really so nice to have you here. And my dear, dear friend, Susan Palmer, to whom I've dedicated the book, Arborophobia. And this is the first time she's heard me read from it, so I'm really happy that she's here as well. This panel is called Corrective Lens, and I always think that, I don't turn a corrective lens, I hope, on anyone but myself, for the most part. So what I've done is I've chosen some poems from the book that in some ways, I think, are about vision or perspective or have eyes in them, essentially. The first poem I'll read is one about one of the Catholic saints. Saints, are in the Catholic, tradition often have these iconic attributes, and St. Lucy has her eyes in a bowl for various martyrdom reasons. St. Lucy, who carries her eyes in a bowl. May I offer you an eye, a young woman's orb, freshly plucked, the lens a clear lozenge, not yellowed with age, inside a layer of chocolatey retina and a filling of gel, not even a lump or a floater, a ball uncataract, cleansed of lid and lash, its blue iris anise-flavored, I speculate, to accompany the gush of ocular salt on the tongue. The next one I'd like to read is called Lunolio, and it's various perceptions of the moon, that poet's dream object. So yeah, it's sort of looking at the moon from various ways, depending on your stage of life, I suppose. Lunolio. Dear erratic pendulum moon, it is only you, thou, you, that I so address. Oh, moon, moon, lap, lap, lapping up that track on the lake, the baying all night, moon, oh, moon. Canoe-hipped boy, girl, mountain tongs grasping the cart-wheeling clavicle, you gob of spit, larva pearl, cell of galactic honeycomb, you. Wading up to knee, wrist, belly, skin parting for you, to thee, slender ankled queen king, teeth beaming, bones opening tubes to moon marrow, moon pin at dawn, moon needle at night. Oh moon, dear pendulum pots and pans banging moon. Headbanger, eye-rolling, unspeakable moon, you're not going anywhere. You're on your leash. You're barking up the wrong sea. You're howling, baring your fangs, foaming spittle all over the sky. Those nip-pricking puppy teeth worried my finger, but now I ignore your pock-faced leer most of the time. Most of the lecherous time, big winker. There's no getting away from your paws. You reach round mound and house, spy through windows with ultrasound eyes. Well, I keep that moon-colored scar out for you, but hang my body in a dark closet on my chicken bones. On my swinging, swaying body, you marked me from birth. Moon stamped on fingernails, new moon breasts, moon wax layered in buttock and thigh, puckered womb glove, once full of moon babies, with rows of snacking teeth and translucent spines, and so many more eggs falling out fallopian tubes into the fringy night. Fringe, furbelow, sachet, and bewilder, moon, oh moon, dear ecstatic cross-dressing moon, thy radiant underwear on the floor, moon, oh moon, blade, tentacle, chain, you cratered and cupped me, my carpenter and my aquarium, your exquisite sloshing, your monthly hammer, hammer, hammer. Have you really stopped jerking me around? We smile, we bow. I hobble after you. You bring a ceremony on a platter, an iced cake. We eyeball each other. We drink tea from cups with saucers. One day I shall step into thy boat, my feet like wafers breaking. Dazzling moon, dear, terrifying, hit by a tide moon. A lot of this book is about our mental states and attitudes so prevalent, certainly around me in Kelowna and maybe in my own head. And this is one of those poems that tries to capture, those attitudes you might hear around you. I'm sure not in your own homes and in your own head. But WTF, the Anthropocene? Back when the nights were nightier and the summers yellower, you couldn't drive a country mile without getting goop all over your windshield. The revolting splats. Who misses them? But it's weird, isn't it? All this invisible stuff just disappearing. Some people are willfully blind, some people are just lost in their own world of comprehension, incomprehension, like people with dementia. This poem is called Pitted, and it plays around with sort of the confusing opposite meanings of words, or potentially so. And maybe I also kind of hear the word pitied in the word pitted. Pitted. Is the walnut in the shell shelled? Or is the walnut out of the shell shelled? Is the fish gutted, or was it gutted? The caregivers allow me to bring cherries to my dad, but only if I pit them. So I drill a bowlful and feed him one heartless, leaking fruit at a time. Soon the brilliant stain is on his face and chin, my fingers, and within minutes, the lips of others who shuffle into the kitchen, mewing and murmuring, the one who thinks he's on a ship, the one who hugs a floppy stuffy, the one so young my dad thinks is his little brother. Ones with cheeks pitted by absent dentures, ones with eyes like pits of forgotten summer thoughts, all gone, all there in the feast of pitted and once pitted cherries. So I'm going to read some poems, just a few poems from a sequence in the book, and if the people at the back could turn the projector on, that would be great. And I'm going to press. Yeah, so I'll just press the button for the first couple of slides, and after that it'll be automatic.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Should I push it?
No, don't, not. Perfect. There we are. Okay, 1 second. I'll press it if you like.
Okay, you press
Yeah,
it.
great. Yeah. So there's a sort of a long sequence in this book called Ponderosa Pines, and it's a series of poems that I wrote alongside and in collaboration with a friend of mine, a painter, Teresa Pozniak. And so as I read the poems, I'm just going to read a few from the sequence. Her paintings will appear up behind me. We just sort of had this collaboration where she would paint pictures of Ponderosa pines. I would write poems. We'd exchange them. I would send her boxes of Ponderosa pine cones and needles and She lives in Calgary, and I live in the Okanagan. The collaboration was really rich for me, and I think for her too. And just in case you don't know, the ponderosa pine is this really lanky, long-needled pine. It has this incredible vanilla-scented bark, and it's multicolored. Its bark is beautiful, like stained glass almost. And it's found growing in these really high altitude regions in western North America. Sort of straddles the Rocky Mountains, dips into Alberta, goes down right into California. So we spent many years talking about them and writing about them and photographing them, etc. So let's start. Good. Okay. All right. So these poems are divided. There's two parts of this sequence. The first part is called Qualms, and again tries to capture these attitudes that people have to the natural world. That's pretty kind of nasty and resentful and angry. And then the second part is called Qualms, and it's trying to capture those attitudes of guilt that we have towards the natural world. So the first part, gotcha. Pines riding their roots, hot rodding, green kapows scattering the birds, pines blitzed, stumbling, sometimes hassling a risky nest, though I fear there's precious little egg laying going on, not in that wooden kimono, not under that cracking whip. This vandal wrecked the fence, crashed right down into my yard. I knew those hoods partied day and night. Bunch of juvies on the hill, tagging the slopes, littering the paths with their needles. But this insult, this FU, this flip-off pine quiff, I'm calling the cops, the bylaw guys, the tree feller, whoever, whatever, you're toast. We're going to hell in a handcart. Plants riot over every inch of seawater and soil. Plankton or pine, who gets the biggest chunk of my taxes? Roots and slime, getting wasted, cashing their checks, chucking their green trash and needles everywhere. Feckless spongers, flogging the waves, whining for the moon. It goes on, but I'm going to read the guilty ones. I feel so bad about the environment. What am I going to do? Sort of a passive nihilism, people have about, when they're virtuous feeling. Qualms. I have had others before the pine in my heart. I have bowed down before drawings of many a deciduous tree. I have taken the name of Pinus ponderosa in vain, both in English and in Latin. I have not remembered the day of the pine and kept it holy. I have not honored the pine cone, the fire, the aquifer, and the squirrel for many of the years I have lived on this earth. In the casket of my house are a pine bowl, a pine shelf, and a pine floor, as well as some ashes. I have committed unspeakable black and white betrayals beneath the pine's kaleidoscopic eye. I have been permissive on the needle-carpeted paths. I have wanted it all the inside-out wooden wealth of the pine. In penance, I kneel before the pine's leather jacket and wait for the cougar to fall upon my neck. If I say you are the furnishing of my tabernacle, with your oiled light, your purple and scarlet linen, oxblood leather, ram skin dyed red, bristling badger skin, your orchid incense, if I worship your glowing crown, your 100 celestial rings, may I sit in your branches in the mercy seat, rocked by the cherubim of sun and rain? May I tarry and abide in the music of your bark, all shingled with tambourine bells? You gorgeous tassel, you torch into feta green swing dress. Wind ballrooms your skirt into whooshing bell. Lanterns your long leg that in flames goes up in flames. That's the last picture. Thank you. And then the last poem I'll read is called The Tribes of Grass. I love grasses and grassland. Give me your spikelets, your glooms, your lemmas and paleas, Give me your sedges and fescues, oats and timothys, such awns, such ascending, barbed, beaked, bearded, heart-shaped, bladed, with collars and bristles, some crowned, some webbed, some keeled, songs succulent, tawny and sheathed, seeds canoed, seeds like pears, dances incurved, dances long, swaying and pale, those palatable, those silky, the humble and the nodding, those that enter the mouths of the grazers, marshes, prairies, hillsides, alpine woods, pastures, meadows, backyards, parks, fields, gardens, wastelands, gravel pits, wrecks, deserts, sand, all yours. All subject to your spears and your invaders, your strings and your orchestras. Where do you not scatter your gestures and fling your grainy notes? No savannah exists without you, no loaf of bread. You are the feathers of the earth, that bird of the sun. Thank you.
Wow. I think we just need to, just take a moment to let that sink in. Thank you so much, Nancy. Okay. Our next reader is Cecily Nicholson. And Cecily is the author of 4 books, past recipient of the Dorothy Livesay Poetry Prize and the Governor General's Literary Award for Poetry. She has held the Ellen and Warren Tallman Writer-in-Residence at Simon Fraser University and Writer-in-Residence at the University of Windsor. Her newest book, Harrowings, takes place in the rural and reconnects with Black intellectual and artistic history in relation to agriculture. Considering movements organizing for food security and resurgent practices, Harrowings addresses cultivation. The poems refuse the romance of husbandry and predictive customs and advance through practical tasks, sowing toward abolitionist futures. Cecily Nicholson.
Thank you. So how about the sound back there? Because my soft voice. Yeah, more? More. Hello, how's that? All right. So folks, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. It's a privilege to speak on these territories. It's a privilege to be in this company. My thanks to the Victoria Festival of Writers and all y'all who put work into that. And I know some of that's visible and a lot of that's invisible, and I appreciate you. Yeah, so I'm gonna read from my brand new book. I just got it a couple of days ago, so I'm still in that kind of enjoying the real life object kind of mode. You've got a kind of a preamble. I'll just say briefly as I read the back of the book. But it connects to rurality, this idea of blackness and a long history on land. But it also connects to my childhood. And so there's a kind of an oscillation between. And then the third sort of component is the work that I've done during the pandemic on a farm led by people who've been formerly incarcerated, and for the purpose of people who are still incarcerated, families who've migrated to the area to be close to families, and as well as elements of restorative justice. So trying to connect these themes. I'm just going to jump in. Place is my hand on a relief cast of carvers. The cast is cool. Hand vibrates to feel the whole surface at once memory and indent sense of prints. Extent charged, tips through index and middle metacarpals. It was the passing shadow of a bird. At rest, my hand settling on Hathaway's sculpture. Associatory, simple elements, the store of atmosphere, pounds of water brought as property. To situate within genealogy, giving backs to land and intellectual and art history. Idle moments put to gathering, to care, to share, food. To not solely succumb to the logics of land, crop, harvest, as required by institutions of slavery and capital. The country wears a rich and luxuriant aspect, writes Frederick Douglass. In the 1st of August celebration at Dawn Settlement, Canada West, public meeting at Chatham, a visit to the Elgin settlement at Buxton, in the Frederick Douglass paper, August 11th, 1854. In 1854, Frederick Douglass set out from Rochester, New York to attend a gathering to mark the 20-year anniversary of the West India Emancipation, the 1st of August celebration at the Dawn Settlement for Fugitive Slaves, traveling most of the 300-mile journey by rail, except 16 miles between Chatham and the settlement referred to by wagon. Douglass journeyed through the territories of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississauga, the Attawandaron, the Anishinaabe, and the Maiamia nations to arrive in the historic county of so-called Kent. About that 1854 journey, Douglass remarks, in regard to the place itself, it is one of the most beautiful and desirable localities for agriculture and commerce and education which we know of in Canada West. I reflect further on fugitivity of that time and upon life in the near aftermath of slavery as the Dominion of Canada formed. The language and logics of farms stem from structures of settler colonialism, even if they embody emancipatory practices. And this makes for complicated dreams. Sufficiently free from the fatigue of the journey, rounding a corner to the song of a lark, the light so familiar, I had to sit. For many voices starts a moth, a lit, a rhetorical Du Bois, faltering inches of progress, the dawning, as the sundial says to the soil, your auntie up the road just now recalls. The light in here, I should stay in a greenhouse all the time. The light is the third lake you had to run early morning, save quartering all afternoon, or risk a catch of storm. This year, I will remember and make a habit of watering the lettuce and the Detroit special beets that run the balcony, a magnificent row, witnessed and admired on a hotbed as sprouts. It's that kind of light in here. From here to you. Here to you. Rock piles. How my brother and I, the youngest, imagine stories in and of the dirt as it descends. Which bones and artifacts will become present? The butterfly stone fossils become possessions. Which culture were we supposed to make fun of ourselves? The dirty fingers, brown and browner, overturn new rocks in the rock pile, freer from the restraint, the mindsets of diggers on our common. Hunting in rock piles, the light stretched longer and longer, enough to risk our feet catching crags of dark matter. We formed adjacent rock beds made out of rocks, and we set ourselves in to watch the sundown over and over the same fields. The sky cast bush shadows and acre-off relief in a thin band of horizon. Stars rose brightly, and they never set. circling the best days. A glow filled our hearts as if our homeland, hometown. Well, and finally, after winter nights, paved roads whitened completely as flakes piled up past cladding and through ditches, the snow fence bending, one ruddy, weak slat after another against the draft whose very purpose seemed to penetrate. The fences figure again and again for now, iron rods in constant burrows of rust chronicling weather. Winter such as this pushed deeper into spring, flattening buds and their longing burst of fragrance, a relief, the time between bird calls lessening, relief when finally the smell of mud struck consciousness, like lilacs, only sweeter. As the heat of the sun registered warmth on skin, trickles of water coursed the driveway, rutting a lower ditch as the water table began to rise. Well, it is barely spring. Winter lingered this year. We need to dig a new well. Knowing enough of septic tanks and cisterns and something of metal alloys comprising pipes and the insulation, prayer that keeps things from bursting on the coldest snowbelt nights, many were awake, but for different reasons, hearing the creaks, knowing enough to be wary. Early lessons in infrastructure. I absolve myself of worry in this future as a renter in a cloud tethered to networks and systems city miles up from rain barrels and the arable. To plan a well could use a diviner in advance. There was something to do and somewhere to start when the pond did not indicate potable. Fallow soil sprouts rocks and thugs and was out of the way, so that happened to be where the diviner encouraged a backhoe to dig. And there, every foot deeper, costs more money. Adults went to work, children went to school, a whole day returns to no new source. Pinched faces at the window murmur about what will happen should they have to stop. Maybe there's insufficient water on this property and likely more debt. Somatically, my body remembers the farm as a rurally entrenched kid, as I lived once cultivated and punctuated by the occasional bush and ditches that weren't much at all, like these rolling hills songed in mission bells in reach of cemetery lawns across the road away that feel familiar now. I think on Vicky Mochama's, oops, it's the wrong side. We'll get to Vicky. Sad truth, I'm missing a page. We'll get to Vicky now. I think on Vicky Mochama's discussion of mutual aid and other reminders that these practices are not new, rather long-standing traditions instilled in Black community and experience. After carceral, end of days stitched together, the sewn and sung drums reconstituted. Vegetable seeds, beet seeds, Detroit Supreme beet seeds, long-time standard green with a maroon tinge, full sun or partial shade. Well, I'll have to call it like that. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Cecily. I love where you take us. Just going to leave it a second. We're just going to reorganize here. And there. So our Our final reader is Jan Zwicky, who's the author of over 20 books of poetry and prose, including Songs for Relinquishing the Earth, which won the Governor General's Award, The Long Walk, and Wisdom and Metaphor. She grew up on the prairies in Treaty 9 territory and currently lives on the west coast of Canada. And Robert Moody is the co-author of this book. He's not only a celebrated photographer, but an acclaimed mathematician, noted in particular for his work on the complexities of symmetry. He is currently at work on a monumental study of the mathematics of pattern. Born in England, but raised in Canada, he now divides his time between Pasadena, California, and Victoria, BC. He's an officer of the Order of Canada. Their book, 67 Ontological Studies, is a double-stranded book of intense lyric reflections on the fundamental essences of things. The two modes of attention, Jan Zwicky's words and Robert Moody's photographs, are presented as fully co-equal. They are brought together here in a resonant conversation.
We're going to read and present a total of 16 of these ontological studies. I'll read 10 poems, and Robert will show 6 photographs. We'll show the photographs as their individual things. They'll be up for about 45 seconds. And we'll just proceed then. Armchair. Do you remember, my friend, the doorway we had to widen for your bulk? And that pole lamp with the broken brass ferrule? The nights we 3 saw dawn together. Guardian of lost paperclips and half-glimpsed visions, you who were old and warm and strong. You who embraced me like the earth, while my mind went alight among the houses of the dead. Moon. Moon, there you are again, solo in the pale blue sky. I agree it's strange, the way I stare. The snow on the mountains is as white, their dark rock as remote. I, too, said goodbye to the earth long ago. But you see, I touch it still with my hands, my feet, my eyes. Library. Enter. The calm ranks stretch before you, dank, faintly stuffy, a cosmos of introverts. 10,000 voices, and not one glad hand. Ah, books, your silence, like old snow, deep, without a footprint, even in the heat of June. beached seal dying. It could be I shouldn't wait with you. When I'm dying, I might want to be alone, without distraction. Work to do, unhooking and unbraiding, loosening the seams. I'll be glad if it's like this, though, under open sky, near dusk, the bow wave of the distant ferry, motionless, a gull tipped sideways for a second in the wind. Effervescence. The wine opens its arms, and its soul streams upwards, breaking back into the air. The long throat of being, its liquid body, and the soul. Is it breath or light? Sparkling, we say. The radiance of dissolution bursting on our lips. Old books. The world is once again a desert, but head out anyway among the banded cliffs, the untalkative sands. There's a place you know, a seep, the water sweet, miraculously cool, no more than a trickle, and the tin cup pocked and battered. But it has never, down all the centuries, run dry. String quartet. What was it that you heard half a century ago, transfixed there at the top of the stairs, the evening pink above suburban rooftops, the radio left playing by the homework on your desk. How did you know, you who knew nothing of Europe or deafness or love, that someone finally was telling the truth? Translation. Struggling with the lexicon, the grammar crib, straining towards sense, suddenly, across 20 centuries, out of unimaginable foreignness, some other mind leaps up to meet your own. As though your heart and his were eyes, and above the smoke, the hordes, the shouting, those eyes locked. View from the ferry. Last car on the upper deck, so as we pull into dock, I'm standing aft in the open air. The ferry stalls, slow as the sun this time of year. 3 p.m., already dusk gnaws at the edges of the shadows. We drift towards rush hour, eyes front. And there, behind a tangle of guy ropes, pilings, warning signs, a mixed flock of 50, maybe more, buffleheads, scoters, mergansers, dipping, swiveling. It rides the swell as one mind, weightless in the gusting light. Rocky shore. Sharp sun and a big northwest wind, the world a breathless rumpus underneath. Gulls up, wheeling high against the light tide, running fast out in the strait. Earth with its arms wide open, uncountable its loves. Even you, even me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan and Robert. And thank you to all of our readers today. Thank you. So I feel like I have to defend my title after what Nancy's remark. But one of the things I was trying to do, because I did think about it, it was a bit cringy about the corrective. But on the other hand, the idea was just, if any of you have been myopic, you know, the first pair of glasses you put on, it is magic, it's miracle. You see every single leaf on every tree, and it's a remarkable thing. And I feel that that is the gift that these poets give us with these books. So I very much appreciate that. Thank you. And with the photographs, thank you. So this is maybe where we could start, is with the landscapes that you bring so sharply into view. And Nancy, I just wanted to start with you because you were a first reader, and our borophobia. I just think, you know, yeah, it was a wonderful read. Wonderful read. It's at the back. And I loved the way you moved from the land and its inhabitants to saints, to floods and fires, and the final poem that Nancy read is the first poem in the book, and you could see the grass made up of individuals with striking differences as well as similarities. And this is one thing I really got from your book and your other books, is the sense that you have of plants as other beings, as equal beings, our neighbors in the world. And you find these personalities and reveal them to us, and you reveal us to ourselves. And I wondered about if you could just speak to how your intimacy and identification with the land and its flora and fauna sort of inform and inspire your work.
Thank you. That was really lovely. Well, I'm certainly a plant lover. I love plants. Probably if I would go back, you know, and redo my life, I would be, you know, Victorian lady flower painter or something. I just love plants. I guess there's something about the rootedness of plants, but also their incredible life force. You know, they're just everywhere on the planet, and if you're a gardener, you know that you can't stop them. Like, you just are always weeding. Like, if you're on the farm, right, where you're farming, you're always weeding, and they erupt, and you don't know where they're going to erupt. And they volunteers come up in the spring, and you know, like it's kind of I don't know. It's like the essence of life, the mystery and magic of life for me with plants. And so I think when you're, you know, I guess in some ways, that's what I write poems about, you know, whether it's, you know, children and mothers and plants, you know, they all seem to be connected in some way. And you know, my sense of, you know, poetry is this, you know, way of talking to the mystery. And I guess that's what I'm doing with talking about plants. But it's a really good question. Thanks, Susan. I hadn't really thought about that before, but yeah, maybe that's what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, and the level of attentiveness, and I imagine stillness that you need to really observe, you know, to really observe a plant.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that there's this essay. It's actually from a science journal of some kind. I can't remember where exactly, but it's called "Standing in the Shadow of Plants," and she talks about how most of us have plant blindness. You know, that we have this. We go into a forest or into a garden or something. You often don't differentiate between the plants. I mean, unless you're someone who's really obsessed with plants. And she just talked about. She sort of does a literature review about plant blindness and how prevalent it is. Certainly in, you know, Western, you know, Eurocentric cultures where you don't pay attention. But you know, if you go and do a walk with, for instance, an Indigenous elder, as I have done at times in the Okanagan, the incredible attentiveness to how the flower is structured and how the name of the plant indicates how they're structured, and the use of the plant for human beings and also for other animals is remarkable. I sort of love that kind of learning, and it's humbling to realize how little I know about plants, really. You know, when you're with someone who has studied them so profoundly, right?
Yeah.
Through their language as well as observation, right? Yeah.
Right. Well, thank you for that. I know whenever I go in the woods with someone who really sees things as individuals, it's like my daughter over there. it's an amazing. It's a different. It's a whole different world, and your eyes open up. So, Cecily, I wanted to ask you about harrowings, just what a resonant and multi-layered word that was, and I wondered when you found the title for your collection and how you felt when you got it.
Well, I've had an occasion to think about that recently, so I have an answer. To me, it came partway through the writing of the poems for this book, and so you know you have your working title, which my working title for a while was Harrows. I grew just uncomfortable with it because it was such a link so rigidly to the farm implement itself, and it wasn't really an active word for me. So harrowings technically is a word, but it's not one that people use very often. So it ends up interrupting, you know, we know the word harrowing, but when you make it a plural, it interrupts, I think, some of that, the literalness of it. So for me, it's thinking through that relationship to tilling and the soil, and that sort of surface kind of connection to ecosystem. But it's also thinking through, obviously, harrowing experiences. So this book contains elements of trauma of my own life in some ways, understated, but also thinking through a genealogy of resilience and trauma for Black community on this continent. And so the long histories relative to experiences of slavery, indentured labor, sharecropping, seasonal labor, which is the labor behind our current, so much of our current industry in terms of produce today, that Black communities continue to be overrepresented in. So I think about harrowings and all the sort of sociological or economic and political elements of that, and how that I'm related to that. And so my respect for that. And so I feel like that word started to create an entry point. I see it in all caps, so I kind of like it. I actually always want things in small cap or small letters, but never works out that way when you get to publish things for some reason. But anyway, so I like this kind of the word itself, also for its pieces. So the harrow, the arrow, the owings, the wings, and so on, and also the connotation. So heroines, happenings, starts to have this kind of liberatory feeling for me. So yeah, so I don't know, it helped me gain perspective. And you had asked me how I felt when yeah, you get a kind of relief, I think, when you land on a title of a book. Like, it kind of sings to you, and you know that you can live with it, because you must, because it's now your book forever. So there is a good feeling when that poetry lands, and that it feels like it relates well to the work. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you so much for that. I also loved how you pulled in so many different aspects of your life, of Black history and incarceration and your personal experiences. And I wondered, I know you did quite a lot of research for this book. So was it a dance back and forth from the research and the extensive, you know, your own personal connection to the land? And was it back,
Sure.
the way the poems shaped?
Yeah. Well, I'll say a little bit about that. So, you know, I think about Leanne Simpson's notion of an embodied practice in terms of theory, and I mean, we all have so much to learn from her conversations around land as pedagogy. And I think about that and for many, many years from a number of different angles. So there is an embodiedness for sure in terms of the research. For this project, though, the relationship to plant and any sort of fine details around, the chemistry of soil or whatever, I mean, a lot of that related to the work in practice. And it also was looking back to a childhood where my relationship to farming overwhelmingly was about labor. It wasn't about intelligence. So I wasn't raised to understand what I was doing. I was expected to do things as farm life, if anybody's experienced it, is rigorous. So at this late stage, it's been this beautiful thing, an opportunity for me to reconnect to that labor, but to also encapsulate it in its deep and robust intellectual history, and in particular that of a Black rurality, which I did not grow up with that context being a part of my curriculum or understanding. I grew up about an hour and 50 minutes away from Chatham. I did not know about it. I didn't know about the Underground Railroad. I didn't know about Frederick Douglass. I didn't know about these early histories. And so to be able to bring that back to my youth while they also live it in the contemporary. So the research really, when it came to actual books and such, was mainly into the archives of Southwestern Ontario, so-called, particularly looking at figures like Mary Shadd, the work of Dan Hill, Lawrence's dad, Peggy Bristow, like really strong roots to African Canadian, people of African descent in that area. So there's obviously lots of research through time. So that was the research part. The rest of it was lived and grounded. So, yeah.
Thanks so much. And I just caveat to that, the research is impeccably woven into this book. It's beautiful. It's not a research.
Thank you.
Jan and Robert, 67 ontological studies. What a collection of word images and photographic images, not just the natural world, but human-made things, of concepts, of, I love the armchair. We saw the armchair and heard the library. I sort of imagined what you were doing as a kind of a deep seeing into the being of these things. And I wondered how you collaborated on that deep seeing that I see as the heart of this book.
Okay.
Oh.
I could say something?
Yeah. We need you there.
Can you hear me?
Maybe closer, as close as possible.
Closest. How's that?
Perfect.
How did we come to collaborate, and how did this book come together? Two slightly separate questions. Yes. So we actually known each other about 30 years, but I first knew her as a musician because my wife was a musician, and then I knew her as a philosopher and one who was interested in mathematics, which was great. But it wasn't until she won the Governor General's Award that you mentioned the songs Relinquishing the Earth. I realized, she's a poet, too. Fantastic. And so that's how I came to know the three aspects which are so important to Jan's life. And at that time, I resumed a teenage hobby of photography. At that point in my life, I had enough money to be able to buy a camera, and so I got a camera, built a darkroom, and started to produce prints. And Jan really encouraged me, and she liked them, and then she started to use them.
I love them.
Some on the covers of some of her books, and then we did a book together, which was her book on the translations or versions of poems, sonnets by Vittoria Colonna, who was an intimate friend of Michelangelo. And beautiful. I mean, even though I'm not particularly religious, but that's so beautiful. And so she mentioned, well, would there be any pictures you could put with them? I hadn't a clue, but eventually ended up in Barcelona, the famous cathedral there, the Gaudi Cathedral, and there's this Passion facade, and which is by Suberox, actually. And there I took a whole sequence of photographs, and we interleaved them with the poems, and that's how that book came about. So this last book, I'm sort of going to pass it over to Jan to tell you how that came about.
I don't know. I mean, I do know it, but I can't describe. There was no recipe. There was no particular plan. There was no forethought. But Robert's images have always physically stopped my breath. There's an extraordinary combination of stillness, complexity, balance. So there's a liveliness, a breathingness, but it's calm. All of them, I respond very, very strongly. And the idea that I see Robert as engaged in ontological study. I was counting the syllables. You have 6 syllables in your title. We just have 5. But it's a pretty long word. It comes from the Greek word for being, and it's a word that means being. And it's what I see Robert doing, that he's something about those photographs does reach deeply into what is real. I see it better when I look at his photographs. I'm incredibly honored that he finds something in my poems that sits well with that seeing. So that's what I can say.
Yeah, I could say one more thing, and that is that I think the thing that I've noticed is that there's a certain resonance between the way we see the world. I think that's the way of it. We both see there's some commonality between it, even though one's a visual and one's verbal. So I think that that might be a key ingredient. But as for the book, it was just a kind of try and pushing it together.
There's something really important about intuition. I mean, yeah, you're a mathematician, I'm a philosopher. We're supposed to be into our heads, but we're not working that way.
No,
none of this is figured out. None of this is about a theory or an abstraction, or it's all quasi-physical, like recognition. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Behind, and I loved also the way the Ponderosa Pine art that you drew from. Those are fabulous paintings as well as a fabulous poem. And it sounds like that was enriching, and a collaboration that we get the benefit of without seeing the other half almost. But I guess it's there somehow, is it?
It's for me, yeah, for sure. Yeah, for sure it is. And it's sort of like Jan and Robert say, it wasn't a recipe. It was just sort of an exchange, a back and forth, and we're working in completely different, really, points of view, right?
Are the photographs of the paintings in the book?
No, just the cover.
And have you done a show?
We have, yeah. There was a show in Calgary, and
did you
my
read
poems
or
I read there, and some of my poems were in the gallery as well. Yeah, and it was great. It was really wonderful. Yeah, experience to put them together.
Perfect.
But, yeah, but there's that. I think it's that resonance. There's something about that word that you use, that the resonance that
And in Cecily's book, one of the interesting things is she's a photographer, but there's these image descriptions that are in the book of poems. So I just wondered Cecily, if you could just speak to how you saw the poems in your book working with the description, like the word descriptions of images?
Well, the poems were generated from, they're both hybrid sort of visual art projects that was part of commissions or invitations. And every opportunity this last couple of years that I've had to do work specific to this farm, Emma's Acres, that I've been privileged to volunteer at, I've kind of taken that because it's given me a chance to work on that relationship between visual culture and sort of how the poetics of that might unfold. But I didn't want to use the photography. I wanted to be devoted to a poetics that was literal, and I have a number of friends who are non-visual learners, and I believe that the art of visual description is poetry, and the capacity for people to render language that actually somehow captures an image is a deep skill set. It's not an easy thing to do. And so working with those publications, that's working with a visual descriptor and my image and ideas about that. So it's another level of collaboration. It's a devotion to text on the page. Although, as I was sharing earlier, that in terms of the photography and the collage work, I have presented that in sort of visual moments, especially during the pandemic, because we're in that online format where we have mastered the PowerPoint and screen sharing and not muting ourselves and all of that. So I did practice that because I'd grown so tired of looking at my own face, or trying not to. So that was part of the compulsion there. But yeah, I think there's an access there that's always going to be for images, and so I respect that. I don't think I answered your question.
That's totally good. No, my question was wide open. I just hope the audience caught the two moon poems, that Nancy and Jan's poems about the moon, and how incredibly different in tone they were. And it really, like, Nancy's was rollicking and like a truly intimidating moon, and Jan's is intimate, and it broke my heart. But I just wanted to point out that, wow, we can still say things about the moon today.
Isn't it amazing? For like thousands of years, we can still write poems about the moon.
Yeah. So there is something like essential and eternal in poetry, because these images do go so deep. But I really want to discuss that, but I'm not going to, because I just want to finish our discussion here with, behind all the generative and generous nature that are on the earth that comes out in your poems, there is the darkness of what humans have done and are doing to the soil and the water and the plants and the animals and to ourselves. And this is a question for all of you. I just want you to pop popcorn in. How do you see your book fitting into, the reality of what's going on with the earth? And also, how do you balance the despair of that and the hope? And I'm just going to put it out there. Anybody?
Popcorn. Let me just say briefly, I'll try to say briefly. I think that constant despair is absolutely not a new thing for myself or for many people, my communities, and through our lives. So it's not a new phenomenon. And I think the urgent feels that I'm trying to corral in this book have to do with collectivity, elements of mutual aid and support, the idea of food security, what community actually means, and really trying to connect in deep ways to beauty and joy all the while, and doing that in a present, but also through my memory. And to me, that's about getting out of bed in the morning, having stuff to do and purpose. And I see it around me all the time, so it's not an individual thing. It's trying to connect to what I see functioning all the time in terms of how people relate and get by. But ultimately, in this book, some of my favorite things that I hope stick with people or are helpful is just fact-based stuff around soils and plants and growing things. So, I mean, if you happen to be thinking about doing some farming work, you might want to pick it up for that reason.
Jan?
I'm the co-author of a book on the cataclysm, the human-generated cataclysm. The title of the book is Learning to Die. I do not have any hope. But I think that it is possible to attempt to live with integrity, which involves admitting one's complicity and also trying to stand up straight through seeing what is. I think that attention is one of the things that we're no longer very good at. But it feeds us, and it is an acknowledgement of beauty and reality, as well as horror. And it's critical if you want to live towards the truth, which I think is what is left to us.
Thank you.
Hard to say anything after both what Cicely and Jan says. I have a kind of ambivalent relationship to despair around climate change. I mean, European culture for the past 2,000 years has lived with predicting apocalypses of one kind or another, right? You know, we always do that, you know, in this particular culture. Some millennial sort of, you know, catastrophe is going to happen. And of course, I believe that climate change is a catastrophe, and we see it happening all around us all the time. We're in the middle of it. But, you know, it's often very privileged people on this planet who are most worried about it. Because as Cicely said, so many people around the globe are suffering all the time, and with all kinds of terrible things that are happening in their communities and to their land. And so I try not to fall into despair, because I think it's not helpful, and I think sometimes it's mostly all about me, right? So that's one thing. Another thing is that, like, I hope that we can do better. You know, and I listened to a radio program a while ago, and it was an architect, and he was talking about heat islands in cities, and how we could plant gardens and dig up parking lots and plant trees and things like that. And the interviewer said, well, those really tiny little things are not going to make much difference. And he said something that was really interesting. He said, you know, climate change is the result of hundreds of millions of daily acts and choices around the world. And the only thing that will change climate change is hundreds of millions of daily acts that make a difference. And so I think that makes me feel better that, I don't know, maybe that's a bit pie in the sky, but that little tiny things that you do every day. You ride your bike, you whatever, you know, get a solar panel, whatever, makes perhaps some tiny difference. The more and more people who do it, maybe there's some hope. So I don't know if I'm hopeful, but I think maybe there is hope.
Hope is a pretty loaded word. So I would like to open it up. We're almost out of time, but I'm sure we can sneak a question or two in. Anybody? Oh, there's one over there.
I was wondering if there was a specific moment when you were volunteering during the pandemic that inspired your ecology or inspired a significant part of it.
Thanks for the question. So I think if was there a specific moment working, volunteering on the farm that inspired the collection itself? Not necessarily one specific thing, but there was something that happened early on. So I started volunteering at the Emma's Acres along with my poet sister, Mercedes Ng, and we needed to get out of town. We needed to do something physical. Our mental healths were suffering, and we have a long series of practice in relations to working with communities inside. I've been visiting and part of prison organizing, not prison organizing, but the other side of it, for a long time. And during the pandemic, of course, social programs shut down. There was no access to so many things for people who were incarcerated. And it's a devastating, we're still just scratching the surface of how devastating that's been for people's mental health. We talk about lockdown as a metaphor, but in those contexts, it was actual lockdown. And you know, when somebody spends 23 out of 24 hours of their day in a particular space. So that agony of not being able to connect, you know, we understand, and I say we, thinking about collectives of people that I belong to, but we understand that as the extensions of our community and our family. So that being severed was a really difficult time. So there was something about being in the farm where people from prisons had historically been volunteering who were missing. And a group of us started to do some work around correspondence. And so that moment started to remind me, because you know, I was feeling some ways about poetry too, by the way, but it reminded me of what the work of it is, and also knowing what that correspondence and what the work of poetry inside prisons also does. So much respect. And so wanting to connect to that. But also, like, really, I talk about the somatic, but starting to really reconnect to the idea of farm. I grew up on one. I've hated it. I've always been, you know, not wanting to talk through, you know, when you're a black kid in Canada, or you're a black kid in North America, maybe I can even be so broad as that, we are inherently linked to an urban sensibility. And so the idea of being rural is just not even a part of us, you know, so it was this shut down part. But it started to open. And it opened joyfully, and as opposed to reconnecting to all the painful stuff. So I think that was just an inspiration for me, for sure. But in particular, I started writing about the tomatoes. And there's people at the Emma's Acres now, and folks have returned from different programs relative to the prisons, and there's lots of changes and shifts and so on. But folks who may not know my name there, but will know Merce and I as the Tomato Ladies. And I feel like that's kind of, you know, I'm gonna go with that as an accomplishment that I get to be a tomato lady. But yeah, I got really, really inspired by those tomatoes.
There you go.
And so on. Thanks for the question. Yeah.
Very good. Any one last question, maybe? Oh, up there.
Yes, question for particularly Jan already. Jan, thank you both of your poems that read the past, the reflection of what we were seeing, and clearly all three poets were really very involved. And I guess I was just wondering how we begin to see in such a way that allows us to notice what our blindness is.
So a question about how to begin to develop attention? Yes. Actually, Warren Haiti, a poet, has written a very fine book on attention. He's done a close reading of Simone Weil, who spent a lot of time thinking about attention. Weil calls attention the natural prayer of the soul. So it isn't a meditative state, but there is an opening, a calmness, as in meditation, the focus stops being on yourself and it moves into the world and what's immediately there. So for reading, I'd recommend Warren's book, or Gravity and Grace. There's a wonderful chapter on attention. and meditative practice of just being in the world, allowing the slowing down in any context at all. It can happen orally, it can happen kinesthetically, through smell as well as vision, and just slowing and allowing what's there to register. I'm sure many of you have experienced this in meditation. So that would be a place to begin.
All right, thank you. That's a beautiful place to end this evening, with attention. And I think that is one thing that poetry does, is the poets themselves, their attention creates the poem, and then they help us to pay attention. And just thank you for your attention and participation this evening. I really, just really appreciate the fact that you're out and here, and I'm hoping you're enjoying the festival. I just want to thank again Planet Earth Poetry and the Victoria Festival of Authors and Laura Trunke for hosting this event, and all the sponsors. And just to remind you that the books are available at the back, and not just these ones, but other ones. And finally, just let's thank our poets, Cecily Nicholson, Nancy Holmes, Jan Zwicky, and Robert Moody. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
And thank you, Susan. Great job. I won't repeat what was all just said, but I'll underscore that the books are available, and it's a rare opportunity lately to have the authors here to sign them for you, so please take advantage of that. Everyone seems very lovely and nice, so say hello. But still COVID, so please respect some protocols and keep a safe distance. There are many more events during the festival, and you can refer to your program if you don't know what else is around the corner this weekend. Our website also features Q&As with all the authors participating in Victoria Festival of Authors this year, and is a place for you to sign up for our newsletter, so please refer to victoriafestivalofauthors.ca. If you would like to support the festival in another way, please visit us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and encourage your friends to attend one of our events. If you had fun tonight, bring a friend next time. You can also make a tax-deductible donation, not too late for this year. There's the Victoria Festival Authors website, as well as the VFA page on Canada Helps, which will generate a tax receipt for you immediately. Your donations help to keep the VFA an engaging, accessible, and sustainable festival. So thank you very much, and we'll see you again.